Adam, oh, you're joining now? Anyone else?
Yeah. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, no one's on yet.
All right. Interesting. So they have a big kiddush there, or?
Yeah.
Oh. One, how many?
We've got Cressel and Judy so far.
All right, sounds good.
And there's Eliza. Hold
I mean,
on.
I've had to make adjustments, obviously, and
to further understand the race for influence in Africa, by Mbemba.
Sorry, I'm not there.
Director of the Africa Program at the Center for Strategic and International.
You're muted.
Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. So Biden's visit to Angola marks
Hey
sort of his
folks,
last
we'll get started in just a minute. We'll just give
visit to the nation by a
some
sitting.
folks a little more time to
How do you deal with that?
come
What
on
message do you take
board.
away from
Did
that?
everyone get the sources, by the way? Okay, cool. Awesome. Great. I'm gonna mute for the moment, but we'll start in another minute or two.
Okay.
Hey, Ethan.
Hey, how's everyone?
Good. Thank God. We're gonna get started in just a minute. Just gonna
Great.
give folks a little more time
Okay.
to come on, then we'll get going.
Rabbi, you're in the shul?
Yeah,
Is anyone there?
I've got Mordechai and Risa here.
Oh, great, and I'll be there next time.
Awesome.
Sorry, obviously I had to.
No, that's great.
Okay. Okay.
2 for 1 Deutsches.
That's a bargain. All right.
Yeah, one more minute and then we'll get going.
Okay.
Beseder. So this is a big this will be a big experiment, a good experiment. Just to explain again the in-person and the out-of-person piece. Again, just to get it clear. Ideally, we're gonna try this for the next few weeks. We're gonna see how it goes, but if there's a few folks that are able to come in person, the idea would be to do like a learning Seder for like 20 minutes or so. No pressure. We're happy to have you in any form, in any forum. But try to do a learning Seder for 20 minutes or so. I think we'll figure out our pacing, right? But I think we can cover as much as half a chapter a week, maybe even a whole chapter a week. We'll see. Again, we'll see how quickly we get through it. But to go over the material and then all come together at 7:30 to have a bit of a shear and a little bit of a discussion group. I think part of what I'm envisioning for this is I would like to hear sort of what meaning you guys are getting out of this text, because it's a very interesting philosophically minded text, and it's the kind of text that you really can sort of have you can sort of read it like a book in the sense of you can read it and bring out a lot of meaning that may be in line or may be independent with how the Meforshim in general approach it. But it's really sort of its own dissertation, so to speak. So that's what I hope a lot of the weeks will look like. This week, I don't think we'll get into the first chapter yet. I wanted to do a little bit of introductory material because I think it's important to get context for Kohelet and sort of what it is. So the sources, let's go through the sources a little bit, and then we'll sort of discuss, I'll discuss sort of what I'm thinking with these sources, and then give a little further context for Kohelet and how we can relate to it. So let's start, if everyone has the sources, let's look at this Mishnah in Yadayim, chapter 3, Mishnah 5. Now, just to give a little context for the Mishnah, the discussion here is which holy books make the hands impure, right? There's a rabbinic decree that's a little counterintuitive, but holy books, meaning books that are part of the Bible, books that we write on scrolls, they render the hands ritually impure. Why that is, I have to do more homework on. I think a lot of it has to do with how we'll treat, how Chazal assume you'll treat the book. If it makes the hands impure, I think they assume you'll be more careful with it. But for our purposes here, it's basically a code word to say, is this in the Bible? Is this not in the Bible? Can we have a volunteer to read in the Hebrew or the English, the first Mishnah?
I
Please.
I can read it. Let's see. Oh, wait. You hear me?
Yeah.
A book, for example, a Torah scroll, which was erased, leaving only 85 letters in it, like the portion of Numbers 10, 35, 36. And it was when the ark was raised, renders the hands impure. A scroll on which are written 85 letters, like the portion of, and it was when the ark was raised, renders the hands impure. All sacred scriptures render the hands impure.
Great. So I'm going to pause there for 1 second. That's the principle, right? It's giving two examples of incomplete books of the Torah, but portions of the Torah that are enough to now constitute holy books that will render the hands impure. But the real principle that we're working with here is that all sacred scriptures render the hands impure. And that's really the jumping off point for the rest of this Mishnah. So let's keep going.
The Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes render the hands impure. Rabbi Yehuda says, the Song of Songs renders the hands impure, but there is a dispute regarding Ecclesiastes. Rabbi Jose says, Ecclesiastes does not render the hands impure, and there is a dispute regarding the Song of Songs. Rabbi Shimon says Ecclesiastes is among the relative leniencies of Bet Shammai and the relative stringencies of Bet Hillel.
Yeah, so just a quick aside there. Generally, Beis Shammai was more strict about halacha and Beis Hillel was more lenient. There are some notable exceptions, and this is one of those exceptions. And what that means here is that Beis Shammai said that Ecclesiastes does not render the hands impure, meaning Beis Shammai excluded it from Tanakh, it seems. And Beis Hillel is stringent to say that, yes, it does render the hands impure, which means Beis Hillel is including it in Tanakh. So let's keep going, and then we'll summarize the Mishnah. It's a lot in here, but let's see it inside.
Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said,
Yep.
Azai said, I have received tradition from the mouths of 72 elders. On the day they inducted Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah into his seat as head at the academy, that Song of Songs and Ecclesiastics render the hands impure.
Great.
Rabbi Akiva said, mercy forbid. No one in Israel ever disputed that the Song of Songs renders the hands impure, since nothing in the entire world is worthy but for that day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the scriptures are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of the holies. And if they did dispute, there was only a dispute regarding Ecclesiastes. Rabbi Yochanan ben Yehoshua, the son of Rabbi Akiva's father-in-law, said, in accordance with the words of Ben Azai, thus did they dispute, and thus did they conclude.
Good, good. So to the summary and the conclusion of the Mishnah there, at least according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Yehoshua, is that the halacha goes like what Ben Azai said. And what did Ben Azai say? Ben Azai said he has a tradition from 72 elders that Ecclesiastes does render the hands impure. So two questions that I have about this. One is, what do we see about Ecclesiastes and its inclusion in the Bible?
Well, my view is that the rabbis were not as interested in standardization as their disciples, and transgressive texts had a place in their world. Song of Songs remains, to me, one of the biggest conundrums of all, because I read it as, for the most part, a love poem. I've been told that's crazy if it doesn't have a hidden, impact and a hidden halakhically correct view about Hashem and his people, that it would not be included. If it's just a love song, it couldn't possibly include it, so it has to be an allegory. And if you don't think it's an allegory, that's just wrong. It is an allegory, and if you
Rabbi
include it
Akiva
as,
feels very strongly about that.
yeah, and if you think it's just we're gonna love poem, then why was Akiva especially saying that this is it, this is the stuff? And my view is he was willing to say love is the greatest thing in the world, and here it's in the Torah because there's nothing more important. Akiva was willing to say that, but his disciples might not have been willing to say that. So
Okay.
that goes to the heart of what you're looking at tonight, I think, at least.
Okay. You said an interesting thing. You called it a transgressive text. So
yeah, it's outside of the corpus of and the path of Jewish religion, which was a regulated life, which would lead to sanctity and ethics and Olam Haba by following halakha. And it's not a work that includes any halakhas that I'm aware of. And it's a work that almost takes off and says, okay, look at the world from a completely different angle. Put everything aside and listen to my song.
nice, good. Good. I think we can say that about Shir Hashirim. I think we can say that about Kohelet, about Ecclesiastes. That does tie into sort of my second question, right? We see that its inclusion in the Bible of both of these books was controversial. It wasn't without controversy. It wasn't a shoo-in by any means. And I guess my secondary question is why are these controversial? And I think Ethan is saying good. Anyone else have any thoughts on why these might be controversial books? So fair enough. So that's fine. I'd like to look at the next source, which comes from the Gemara Megillah, the Babylonian Talmud, Megillah 7a. I'll take the first paragraph because it's really a parallel to the Mishnah that we just saw. Very similar.
If I can
and
just,
then we'll
Rabbi,
see-
before you move on, what
Yeah,
do you
please,
have
sorry.
an initial sense of what it can possibly mean to say that a sacred text makes your hands impure? I am completely befuddled.
Yeah, so that again, that's a halacha. It's an interesting halacha that's very counterintuitive and not super relevant to our lives these days because we're all living in a state of ritual impurity as it is. But there's again, I think it affords a certain amount. I think the idea is that you're supposed to be extra careful with these texts. You can't just handle them willy-nilly, like they have a certain importance. But that's something that I will have to research more and get back to you. Just know for now that it's essentially code word for saying, is this part of the Bible or is this not part of the Bible?
Thank you.
So the Gemara in Megillah says, right, the Gemara raises an objection from Brisa, that's from a previous thing. Rabbi Meir says, the book of Ecclesiastes does not render the hands ritually impure. However, there is a dispute with regard to Song of Songs. Rabbi Yossi says, the Song of Songs renders the hands ritually impure, but there is a dispute with regards to the book of Ecclesiastes, right? That's the inverse opinion. Rabbi Shimon says the ruling with regard to Ecclesiastes is among the leniencies of Beis Shammai and among the stringencies of Beis Hillel, right? We saw that in the Mishnah. As according to Beis Hillel, it renders the hands impure, and according to Beis Shammai, it does not. However, everyone agrees that the books of Ruth and the Song of Songs and Esther render the hands ritually impure. Right, so that's interesting. Rabbi Shimon is saying that really Kohelet is a machlokas, but all of these other Megillos, Ruth, even Song of Songs, he says, everyone agrees Song of Songs, which Rabbi Shimon is a student of Rabbi Akiva, so that actually makes a lot of sense. So Ruth, Song of Songs, and Esther all do render the hands ritually impure. Kohelet, maybe, maybe not. So now I'd like to see this brisa. Aliza, would you mind taking us away in the brisa here?
Okay. So it is taught in the bright chair. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says the book of Ecclesiastes does not render the hands ritually impure because it is the wisdom of Solomon and not divinely inspired.
So there, that's already a clue as to why this might not be included in the Bible, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh says that this is Solomon's like thoughts. This is what he's thinking, but it's not divine in any way. Good. Let's keep going.
They said to him, but that was They said to him, but was this all that Shlomo said, and thus included in the Tanakh, because it is the only wisdom we have from him? Wasn't it already stated, and he spoke 3,000 proverbs? And it says, add you not unto his words. Solomon spoke many proverbs, but only a portion of them were canonized in the Bible. Apparently, what is unique about those in Ecclesiastes is that they were divinely inspired.
Right. So in this brisa, it seems to be the point that it hinges on is, are these words divinely inspired or not? Which again, there's actually a possibility in here to include it, even if they weren't, I think. I think if these were the only proverbs that we had from Solomon, then there's a case to say they should have been included. And we'll get back to Solomon and his role in this at the end of the shir today. But the debate here seems to be, do we assume that this is written with what they call Ruach HaKodesh, written with translated Holy Spirit, without, maybe with some of the connotations that the Christians use, but certainly without some of the connotations as well. But divinely inspired, I think, is how we usually translate that. And whether it was or was not is key to whether this is part of the Bible. And we actually conclude that, at least this brisa concludes that it is divinely inspired and it is part of the Bible. So let's go to Kohelet Rabbah. We have about, we're doing good with time, because again, I want to give more context after we see these sources, but let's go to Kohelet Rabbah.
If I may just say something about, so the Bartanura on the Mishnah, not here, but elsewhere, says that the reason for this was a gezerah, was a decree, because people thought that, well, since the books of the Bible, Kisvei Kodesh and Truma are both holy, we'll keep them together. So what happened was, the mice would be attracted to the Truma, which is, grain or other kinds of food. And so when they were going and eating up the Truma, they would also eat up the Kisvei Kodesh. So this way they said, well, this is actually Mitameis Yadayim. So it's going to, you shouldn't keep it together. That's the Bartanura. That's the way he explains it.
Okay, good. So there's the Bartanura on why it is that holy books make the hands impure. It's a rabbinic decree so that people will keep them away from Truma, which Truma is ritually pure. And if the mice get in and they eat the Truma, they would be eating the books also. So you keep it on your nicer bookshelf away from the food, and the mice won't also eat your holy books. So that's good. That's helpful. Again, feels very foreign to us these days. You know, I don't know if you have a granary or if you keep a chumash in there, but good. Let's do Koheles Rabbah. Ethan, would you mind taking us away in this medrash a little bit? Oh, I think you're muted.
I don't have all the sources in front of me. I don't know what's going
Okay.
on with me. I have just the first one that was read by Judy. And
Oh, so there was a secondary email that was sent out.
I'm sorry, you know, I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm not very well organized.
No
So
problem.
I don't have it in front of me. I'm sorry.
No problem. Can I impose on you, Kressel? No pressure. That's fine. Risa, will you read Koheles Rabbah?
What profit is there for a person in all their toil, that they toil under the sun? Ecclesiastes 1:3.
Good. So that's that's one of the opening verses of Ecclesiastes, and now this medrash is going to engage with this verse here. By the way, the medrash on Koheles, there's a lot of medrash on Koheles. So hopefully some of that I'll try to bring some of that in, although again, I don't think that's going to be our main focus, but there's a lot of rich material in there. Okay, good. So let's see.
Rabbi Binyamin said the sages sought to exclude the book of Kohelet, because they found it in matters that tend toward heresy.
Okay, good. Let's pause there for a second. In the Gemara, we saw that maybe it's excluded because maybe it's not divinely inspired. But here we see something stronger. We see in it matters that tend toward heresy. Before we see examples, how does that strike you folks? You know, if you've seen the book of Koheles before, do you agree with that assessment? Are there things in it that might be a little heretical?
Yeah, I think so, because it doesn't really look to Hashem. It really has a certain kind of pose of, you know, the world just keeps turning on its axis, and things happen, you know, endlessly. There's a time for this and that. And as it goes further, it explores different kind of fates, the rich man and this and that, but it really never really looks to heaven. And you might think that it's saying, you know, all that book stuff is good, but the real truth is, like the cynical truth is, you know, this is it. And I think you could say that's very heretical to say that.
Yeah.
I got to push back on that. It seems to me that it concludes exactly about everything is vanity except Hashem.
Oh, good. Good. That's hold on to both of those thoughts. Hold on to both of those thoughts. Let's keep going. Okay. Let's pick it up from they said.
They said, Shlomo, in all of his wisdom, says, what profit is there for a person in all their toil? One could come to the conclusion that this is true even in their exertion in learning Torah. But the sages then concluded, Shlomo did not say in all toil, but rather in their toil. In their toil they do not gain, but they do gain in the toil of learning Torah.
Good. Good. So this first part of the medrash here, the example given here of potential heresy is that in the verse, you know, what good is a person working, you know, under the sun? Like, what good is all the work that they put in? And the sages were concerned because maybe even the work that a person puts into learning Torah, maybe that's for naught. You know, you could come to that conclusion. But then they said, you know what? Actually, the wording of it, they were right. This is how Chazal read Psukim. They said it doesn't say what good is any work. It says what good is a person's work, and the person's work meaning it's their affairs. You know, the stuff. You know, I'm putting in, you know, work at the 9 to 5 so that I can pay my bills, so that I can, you know, have a home and this and that, and that's good. But ultimately, it's not eternal. But of work that isn't my work that's a broader, holier thing of learning Torah. There, of course, there's what to gain, and Shlomo's not denying it. And so that's why we can say it's in the Bible and not heretical. So that's one example. There's a second example on the next page. Mordechai, will you take this second paragraph here? Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak.
Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yitzchak said, the sages sought to suppress or exclude the book of Kohelet because they found in it matters that tend towards heresy. They said, Shlomo said in all of his wisdom, O youth, enjoy yourself while you are young. Let your heart lead you to enjoyment in the days of your youth. Follow the desires of your heart and the glances of your eyes. Ecclesiastes 11:9. Moses said, do not stray after your heart and after your eyes. Numbers 15:39. And Shlomo said, follow the desires of your heart and the glances of your eyes. In saying this, all restraints are loosened, implying there is no justice nor judge. But when Shlomo later in the same verse said, but know well that God will call you to account for all such things, Ecclesiastes 11:9, the sages said that Solomon spoke well.
Right. So we have this verse. Ecclesiastes 11:9 is an interesting verse, and it includes in it, enjoy your youth and follow your heart and your eyes. And they're pointing out that Moshe, we say this in the Shema every day. Don't follow your, don't stray after the desires of your heart and the glances of your eyes. Seems to contradict an explicit teaching of Moshe Rabbeinu. But the end of that verse says, but know that God is going to judge whatever you do. And for that, the sages said, you know what? It's not a heresy. It's okay. We can include it in the Tanakh. I'll take the last one here, and this is where what Kressel said is really going to come in handy. The final source that we're going to look at today, and then we'll summarize a few more context things. But Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, said in the name of Rav, the sages sought to suppress the book of Ecclesiastes and declare it apocryphal because its statements contradict each other, right? So here's a third reason. So far, we've seen maybe it's just what Shlomo thinks and it's not divinely inspired. We've seen maybe it leads to heresy. And here we see that it contradicts itself. It's not internally consistent. Because its statements contradict each other. And why did they not suppress it? Because its beginning consists of matters of Torah and its end consists of matters of Torah. Its beginning consists of matters of Torah, as it is written, what profit has man of all his labor, which he labors under the sun, which is that verse that we just saw. And we see that in both places, Chazal are assuming that that verse is referring to Torah in some capacity. Right, and here's how they prove it over here. The sages of the school of Rabbi Yanai said, under the sun is where man has no profit from his labor. However, before the sun, implying Torah study, which is or was done early in the morning before work, he does have profit. Right, they're making an inference off of that verse to say that there is profit in Torah study, and that's at the beginning of Kohelet. So it's already involved in Torah at the beginning, and its ending consists of matters of Torah as it is written, the end of the matter, all having been heard, fear God and keep his mitzvos, for this is the whole man. Right, that's the very end of the book of Ecclesiastes and sort of sums it up, and that's where we see this idea that everything is vanity except the relationship with God and the way that that God runs the world. So again, the ostensibly contradictory details are secondary to the essence of the book, which I think will be an interesting thing to keep in mind as well. The essence of the book is about Torah, and the fact that there are contradictions in it. Maybe we can even say the fact that some of it could potentially lead to heresy, or even if there is a risk that it wasn't divinely inspired, the fact that its beginning and end are about Torah, at least according to the Chazal here, that is enough to include it. Any follow-ups or thoughts on this before I move on to just a few more contextual pieces?
Yeah, I would say that, in a book that's 11 chapters or so, that you reverse the direction with a single sentence at the end, that's a very ambiguous way of looking at a book or a teaching. That's why I say there's an element of ambiguity and transgressive wisdom that I find in the book, because it's almost like you duck at the end. It's like, if you read the censorship by the church, like the book is forbidden except Joe said at the end that he didn't really mean it, or that's okay kind of thing. So I think a single sentence is a dodgy way of withdrawing, if you will, or altering the intent of the book after you do all that. But also, so one other thing I'll share, I was studying with Rabbi Seton a few weeks back, at Magen David and, Shabbos Mincha, and he said, I don't claim to have the answers, I claim to have the questions. which I thought was a really profound thing. And I think that's the big part of the Jewish, as much as we always have the answers and halakha's answers, really what we have are the questions. And that's why Kohelet is so powerful, is it doesn't accept the tried and true or the mundane or the unambiguous. It has the questions. And I think it has the questions that people ask themselves. Who hasn't felt futility? And it's a book about futility. So I think that's part of its power, which is why people read it as such a modern text, because, you know, you could read it in an existential novel, you know, of the 50s. It really jumps out of the canon in that way. At least that's the way I read it.
Great. So that'll bring me to context stuff as well, because your point, Ethan, about the final line of Kohelet, then turning the whole book into something about faith and relationship with God. The more modern biblical scholars, again, not necessarily religious scholars, but biblical scholars today, that's one of the main points of division among their approach to Ecclesiastes. Is that part at the end, was that a later addition, or was that always part of it and like an essential part of it? So that's debated among secular academics. The Chazal for sure assume that it's part of it, that it's the main thing. But that brings me to sort of two things that I think we have to keep in mind. And I hope everyone will forgive me for these two things. First, I'll say the more frum way. The Chazal assume that this book comes from Shlomo HaMelech, right? The opening lines, Divrei Koheles ben David, right? It sounds like these are the words of Koheles, who is a son of David who reigned in Jerusalem, right? That sounds like Solomon, right? That sounds like that's referring to Solomon. We assume that Shlomo HaMelech, we have a tradition that he's the wisest of all of our sages, all of our kings, and this is a book of his wisdom. That would place the writing of Kohelet somewhere between 970 and 931 BCE. And there's debates in the Midrashim as to when in Shlomo's life this was written. It could be that it was early on, but there's also, I think, a really interesting idea that Shir HaShirim Shlomo wrote when he was young. Mishlei, or Proverbs, he wrote in his middle ages, and Kohelet was his composition towards the end of his life. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about, at what stages of life bring on certain approaches towards the world. I think that's useful. I think that's interesting. But I think also I have to be responsible and say that there are linguistic indications that say that this was probably written later. Now, I'm still relatively new to Bible scholarship in the more academic sense. It's not part of the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikarim that we have to assume that Kohelet was written by Shlomo HaMelech. You don't have to assume that Kohelet was written by Shlomo. You're not a heretic if you don't assume that, according to the Rambam. That's important to keep in mind. And there's linguistic clues. There's the word pardes is of Persian origin. There are a few words here and there that come from Aramaic or that come from Persian. And there's grammatical pieces as well, where it looks more, the grammar in Sefer Kohelet looks more like the grammar of the Mishnah versus the grammar of like the old biblical books. So also among the secular scholars, there's a debate as to whether this was composed in the Persian period or in the Hellenistic period. And that leads to some interesting thoughts of how much is this engaging with Greek thought? How much is this rejecting Greek thought? How much is this independent from Greek thought? We know that it was completed and important already. We know that it was an important work in Second Temple times because the Book of Ben Sira, which is part of the Apocrypha, but Book of Ben Sira, a known Second Temple work, seems familiar with Kohelet. So it definitely was on the scene and was important. I think parts of it, were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. So no matter what, it's been a very important sefer to the Jewish people for a very long time. I think we have to engage seriously with, again, it might be newer philosophical ideas written in the Persian period of the Second Temple period, or it might even be, again, one of the things I'll want to keep in mind, and that I find curious, is how much is this yes or no engaging in or rejecting Greek philosophy. And also, even with that, I do think it's worthwhile and important to keep in mind that the way that traditional sources engage with this, they assume very strongly that this is coming from Shlomo HaMelech. And I think there's also value in reading the work in the way that it purports to be. Whether we think it was written then or not, there's a lot to be gained assuming that it is Shlomo. There's a lot to be gained assuming that it's a later work with later context. I hope that we'll be able to explore a little bit of all of that, but I think also the main thing that I'm very curious about is what meaning do we get out of it as we're reading this in 2024, almost 2025. And I think that's going to be more the focus than what Chazal say. We'll bring it in for sure. It's important. Or what the secular scholars say. A lot of what I'm hoping to get out of this is what are we gleaning from it today? So I think that's the basic introduction so far. Any questions or comments, follow-ups on that? I know we're 5 minutes over, but
I like that approach. I want to engage with the text directly for what it says.
yeah,
I think the whole biblical modern stuff is a parallel universe. I just really, I don't know how you integrate it into the fact that these texts are ours and are so important to us.
okay.
I just don't see that. I maybe this is magical thinking, but I've read some of the stuff and it leaves me cold. I don't really see what it does. Ideas themselves have all the power, so engaging with them, fine. But, I find the modern scholarship is, I say, it's just a parallel universe. I just, if you want to enter it, and I'm not against it, I just don't, for me, it doesn't.
Yeah, I don't mean entering it seriously in terms of like delving into it, just more along the lines of understanding it in the context of like thought and philosophy and the developments of that. But, fair enough, You're saying good.
Yeah. The amazing thing is that this text for 2,500 years has spoken to us, the Jewish people. So that to me is what's important.
Good. This Seder. Okay, so I think we'll hold here. Feel free to reach out if anything comes up in between, but plan will be to say same thing, same time next week. Okay. There will be the end of December, we'll probably miss a couple of weeks. We'll figure out scheduling. We'll talk scheduling next week, but thanks folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you very much.